Hello, this is Todd Luck, and this is a video on my spoiler thoughts on Korak at the Earth's Core. This is a novel from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. that's out right now, and you can order it and get it on Kindle, or you can get it softcover, hardcover, or collector's edition. And if you get it from Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc., you can actually get free bonus trading cards. And so again, this is going to be my spoiler thoughts. I have done a non-spoiler review you should check out. I'm going to try not to be redundant with that review. I'm not going to repeat things I said in there. That was a lot of my general thoughts. We're going to get into more specifics here. And before we get started, I just want to point out that I am going to have a lot of critiques, but I did enjoy those final chapters, and I think they set up a very strong trilogy in the next couple novels. So I just want to point that out before we get going. So obviously this novel was delayed a little bit. And in the foreword, we find out why. It was Tarzan's fault, of course. And so according to the foreword, when Scott Eckerd was at the Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. open house when he got a surprise visit from Tarzan to give him the notes for what would become the Dead Moon trilogy. And so that open house happened in April of 2023. So if you think about it, writing the novel and getting it shipped in a year is actually pretty good. But wait a minute, didn't they announce it a year before that at San Diego Comic-Con in 2022? How could they have announced it before they knew about it? Is it possible that real life isn't canon in the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe? No, I refuse to accept that. I declare this a Win Scott Eckerd time discrepancy, and I demand a novel devoted to rectifying this inconsistency. Win Scott Eckerd at the Earth's Core. And half of it's just going to be Abner Perry explaining the scientific theory behind it. And so the novel begins with a fight with the Horribs, and there's a character who is helping Korak and Akut, and his name is Von Horst, and he is a member of the crew that actually came to Pellucidar with Tarzan to save David Enos in Tarzan at the Earth's Core, and he got left behind and had his own adventure in a novel called Back to the Stone Age. And then after they win, for some reason they take one of the Horribs prisoner, and it's like talking with a Horrib on a giant lizard, and then he escapes. And I'm just not quite sure what the point of any of it is in the context of this book. It seems like it's probably there to just try to get these characters in, but I do suspect it's probably setting up for future novels in the trilogy. Speaking of subplots, we come in the middle of the hijacking of the airship. So the airship has been hijacked by some woman named Alex and her thugs, and we're not sure who these people are, why this happened, what the purpose is. The good guys fight back and kill the hijackers, and I hope the hijackers deserved it since we know nothing about them, and Alex escapes. Alex says that she has fooled people about who her family is and indicates she may have a crush on the captain's son, Wolf, and that's about all we know. Obviously, this is a setup for a subplot in the future novels in this trilogy, and they will hopefully explain all of this. As far as characters we do know in the scene, there's Captain Hines from Battle for Pellucidar. There's Davon Enos, who is David Enos' daughter, and she makes a brief appearance, obviously setting up for a future subplot for her in this trilogy, and she does indicate she has a crush on the captain's son, Wolf. And there's also a new character who's a cowgirl with a couple six-shooters, and she indicates that she's descended from a couple people who are, of course, references to Edgar Rice Burroughs novels. One of those novels is The Mucker, and the other is The Apache Devil or Apache Chief. And the Waziri appear. They're acting as the security on this airship. Remember, this is the 1970s, and they're using spears, which is kind of eccentric. I mean, I know that they're trying not to use their guns because that would be disastrous on an airship, but obviously spears are a little weird in the 70s, but it's a weird world that they live in, right? They're going to Pellucidar. And actually, there's an indication the Waziri are relocating to Pellucidar. I'm not sure why. Obviously, Black people are not endangered in Africa. Perhaps they're simply going there because Tarzan offered it. Perhaps they want to be closer to Tarzan. I don't know. We'll find out in future parts of this trilogy, I'm sure. There is a subplot that should be in the future books that will involve a Waziri warrior princess, so I look forward to that. And so there are Mangani, or apes, that are on board this airship, and this is part of an effort to relocate them as humans spread over Africa, right? And it's kind of interesting because obviously, even in modern day times, this is set back in the 70s, but in modern day times, there's still plenty of rainforests left in the world, right? In fact, in Africa, there's 3.7 million kilometers of mostly unexplored rainforest in the Congo. And so they have plenty of options of where to relocate these apes. And they decide to take them to Pellucidar, which is essentially another dimension where they're going to be on the bottom of the food chain. And specifically, they're taking them to the Land of Awful Shadow. Now, in the comics and comic strips, the Land of Awful Shadow and the moon above it are portrayed as hellscapes from which the Mahar launched their revenge plots against the rest of Pellucidar. However, the comics and comic strips do not count with the novels. And they give a perfectly logical explanation of why you would want to relocate the apes to someplace with darkness to simulate nighttime. But it's still called the Land of Awful Shadow. Did they think it's a mistranslation, that it's really the Land of Awesome Shadow? I would have some concerns. And the whole Tarzan family is actually moving to the Earth's core, according to this novel. Now, this is a follow-up to an idea that was first done in Tarzan, The Lost Adventure, which was published in the 90s, and it was later also explored in a comic miniseries called The Savage Heart. However, those versions had him abandoning his family and his entire life to go to the Earth's core. This is much more plausible. Of course he's going to take his family. Of course he's going to take his friends. Of course he's going to get his affairs in order before making such a trip. And he's also going to make sure he's doing it at a time when he's not leaving Africa or the African friends he has in a lurch like he did in the 90s version, which would have taken place during a time of unrest in Africa as the natives struggled against the colonists. And why are they moving to the Earth's core? Of course, the time-honored cliche of trying to hide their immortality. So Tarzan and Jane got a hold of some immortality pills at the end of a novel called Tarzan's Quest by Edgar Rice Burroughs. It never indicates if they or any of their family took them, but it does indicate that Tarzan is already immortal because of something a witch doctor did earlier in his life. According to this novel, they did find a way to replicate the immortality pills using modern science, and Tarzan's entire family has taken these pills. And so they're moving to the Earth's core to try to hide the fact that they're immortal because they're afraid bad guys would come after them. Oh, they might kidnap the women, which was already happening on a regular basis. This is the Tarzan family that we're talking about here. And their solution is to instead move to a land where they're going to be in constant danger and near the bottom of the food chain. There is literally a Pellucidar novel called The Land of Terror, and I don't think it's ironically named. And I just don't know if the general public would really believe that they were immortal anyway unless they just shoved it in people's faces. I mean, there were Burroughs novels where people had a hard time believing Tarzan existed. Can you imagine any reputable paper that would run the headline, Tarzan exists and he's discovered the secret of eternal youth? I don't think Burroughs put this stuff in there because he meant for it to be a big deal or for it to kind of derail their lives or dictate what type of stories to tell with these characters. I think he just put immortality in there because he just didn't want to deal with an aging Tarzan and Jane. And, you know, again, there is an indication that this is how they're dealing with it right now, but they're not always going to deal with it in this way. And so I think there will be future stories where it's a little less about them being immortal. So let's talk about the portrayals of the two main characters, Korak and Miriam. And we'll start with Korak. And so at first I thought they were going for traumatized Tarzan with him because of the flashbacks. You know, I thought that may be PTSD, but I suspect maybe there may be some sci-fi hoodoo, maybe entering. Pellucidar did something to his brain or something with the time travel at the end. I don't know, but he's having flashbacks and he has this insane temper. I mean, he is super hot-headed. The scene where he fought Gork and knocked his teeth out, broke his jaw, was extremely disturbing. He's impulsive to the point of being stupid. I mean, he just flew up to the dead moon and had no idea what to do when he got there. Now, admittedly, I do sympathize with him because I was tired of the exposition as well. His main character traits seem to be that he's violent and hot-headed, that he likes making mostly unfunny dad jokes, and he likes killing things with his ape daddy Akut. I just didn't find him particularly likable. I understand he had a rough childhood, but at this point, that's been 50 years ago, and the portrayals of the character after Son of Tarzan by Burroughs were of a much more noble character than we're seeing in this novel. And unfortunately, the flashbacks that he experiences feel more like teases for stuff in the future novels than it does to flesh out his character. You know, there's a tease about a family business he runs with his son called East Hawking Limited, but we don't know anything about that. There's a tease that he returned to Paladon in 1920 and had a reunion with the German guy who tortured him, but we don't know anything about that either. Miriam is much more likable. She's a kind but strong woman. She is an opera singer when we first see her, and that's picking up on the fact that she did sing to herself when she was a child. It made her feel better, and there was actually a scene in Son of Tarzan where her singing actually was important to the plot. In her subplot, she finds intelligent sea turtles that she can talk to by singing, so essentially she's kind of a Disney princess. It's actually not a bad subplot. I think I would have enjoyed it more if the rest of the novel hadn't been so slow at that point. And one thing that did confuse me, though, was the beginning in chapter 3. You know, she talks about all the problems she has with her husband, and she uses the term last straw. And I thought that this was going to be about the marital problems between the two. I thought she was considering divorce. And obviously that wasn't the case. And I wonder how many people other than me misread that chapter. I'm also surprised about how normal she is. And I understand that it's been quite a while since her childhood, where she was exceptionally weird in Son of Tarzan. But, you know, the thing that struck me about her very brief appearance in Tarzan and the Ant-Man was that she still had that weird proclivity of not using people's proper names. She still referred to Jane as my lady. And so, I don't know, I just expect just a little bit of that weirdness to kind of keep going into her adulthood. There's also some interesting retroactive changes to her character. So, for instance, there's a scene that they insert in The Son of Tarzan where she has an objection to Korak going Grand Theft Jungle and attacking and stealing stuff from the natives. He killed the men. In the original novel, Son of Tarzan, it indicates he does not kill the women. He just takes their stuff. In Son of Tarzan, Miriam is fine with this. In this new novel, it indicates that at some point she did tell Korak she was not and made him promise to stop. And I don't know, the fact that nothing like that was ever even hinted at in Son of Tarzan makes it just kind of weird. I think that it's very natural for characters like Miriam and Korak and Tarzan to change their mind and have different feelings about things that they did in their childhood. I'm totally cool with that. But I don't think you necessarily have to put in a scene in the middle of an old novel that changes things like that. I think you have the entire rest of Korak and Miriam's lives to do whatever you feel like. I think you can leave Son of Tarzan alone. There's so much exposition in this novel, and some of it gets darn weird. Like, for instance, there's a scientist who knew about Pellucidar in Battle for Pellucidar. He gets it hit on the head, forgets about it, and then rediscovers it in Mahar's for Pellucidar. Why? There's also the indication that was given in Battle for Pellucidar that Tarzan gives the Waziri the Greystoke estate in Africa. But then in this novel, it's like, oh, well, they leased it back to him, and that's why the Greystoke name is still on it. I'm not sure why that is. It feels like it's probably explaining something in one of the novels. Abner Perry's explanation for the dead moon was absolutely bizarre, that a chunk of an exploding planet somehow penetrated the Earth and ended up at the Earth's core is just so weird. I got a feeling there's probably more to it that we'll hear about in the other novels in this trilogy. And there was just a weird amount of time and melodrama spent with the fact that the moon is bigger than it looks. To me, this seemed like a very simple thing. This was already used by Burroughs in the Mars novels for the moon of Theria. I just don't get what the big deal was. I mean, why was the scene with the anthill and stuff like that even needed? Speaking about unnecessary exposition about changing sizes, for some reason, there is a recap of Tarzan and the Ant-Man in here. So changing sizes, getting smaller as he's going towards the moon makes Korak remember what his father told him about the Menunians, but it's a completely different situation. Tarzan did not get smaller when he went to their cities, right? He was his normal size until he got captured and someone did some scientific mumbo jumbo to him and turned him small. Perhaps this is a setup for something that'll happen in the other books in this trilogy. What did strike me about it, though, other than Korak being a jerk and not believing his father about the Menunians, was that he seemed to indicate that was the only time he'd ever heard of the Menunians. And that inadvertently, maybe, writes out a possibility of a follow-up to Tarzan and the Ant-Man, right? Because according to that, then Tarzan never returned there, Korak never went there, nobody they know ever went there, at least not before the 70s. Now, of course, you can do some storytelling gymnastics, like maybe someone went there and kept it secret, or maybe someone went there and lost their memory of the adventure or something like that, but it just feels unnecessary. And speaking of unnecessary, Betty Caldwell shows up. And I do like her character, and I think sometimes she can be used quite well. I just didn't feel like she really needed to be here in this particular novel. Most of her time is spent telling us her entire life story, which she says is a short version, which I don't believe. Her purpose here seems to be to establish that there could be a connection between the city of Thuria in Pellucidar and the moon of Thuria, which is in the Mars novels. But I feel like there probably were shorter and simpler ways they could have done that. She just didn't really seem to have any particular purpose in this book other than that. But I suspect that she's being set up to come back and do something more significant in future parts of this trilogy. This novel spends a lot of time talking about the dead moon, but that's not nearly as interesting as actually going there and exploring it. And once we get to the dead moon is when the novel finally starts to work for me. And I found it to be quite good, and I had a very good time with the chapter starting with chapter 20. Marina is by far the best character in here. I like her, and chapter 20 really broke my heart for her. And it was just a really good piece of writing. Yes, her backstory does have a lot of similarities to Sita the Savage. Yes, she is a sacrifice that escaped and violated the rules of her people because she didn't give herself up to the monster. But you know what? It works, and that's the most important thing. I really did feel for her. I mean, my heart just broke about how mean her people were, how horrible her mother was. It was just really good writing. And then it continued with some really great world building with the Sketh, absolutely worthy of Burroughs and the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe. And there was a nice twist with the queen being Alex. Yeah, I mean, nothing original again, but it works. I still don't know who Alex is. My assumption is she's probably maybe a Rockoff or maybe related to the German dude. I'm sure we'll find out in the future novels in the trilogy. And also in those last chapters, we also get Lodar, the husband of Suzanne, and he is a fun character, and I think the novel needed more of him. I will say that the last chapters in here were really enjoyable and I think set up a very strong 2 books left in this trilogy, and I expect them to hopefully be as good or better as what I experienced at the end of this novel. Now we got to talk about that cliffhanger ending. Korak does appear to travel in time and take the place of his childhood self in the past. And assuming that this is not happening in his mind, right? This is not just an illusion in his head, which is possible. If this is real time travel, then it is probably how they're going to deal with the great Korak time discrepancy. All right, so just to sum up what that is, Tarzan was born in 1888. He was 22 when he married Jane in Return of Tarzan. That would make it 1910. Their son Jack was born in 1911 when he was kidnapped by Rockoff in Beast of Tarzan. Son of Tarzan takes place 10 years after Beast of Tarzan. When Jack is 10 years old is when that novel begins. So that would make it 1921. However, Burroughs would later have Korak show up as an adult in 1919 to save his parents in the lost land of Paladon. And he also indicated that Korak was serving in World War I. So how could he have shown up as an adult to save his parents and fight in World War I if he was a kid being raised in England? I always suspected they might use time travel to try to explain it. Now, it gets a little complicated because he does remember saving his parents. He does remember fighting in World War I already, even though he hasn't done it yet. So that kind of makes things complicated, assuming that this really is time travel, unless there is some kind of other explanation that I'm just completely missing here. I personally don't need an explanation for this because, I mean, Burroughs obviously made a mistake, and honestly, I think that's kind of cool, right? That even great writers can sometimes lose track of stuff. It makes the rest of us feel a little better. I just hope that whatever they do with that subplot, that it turns out to be a good story. That's really all I ask for. All right, just to briefly talk about our backup features. Dawn of the Death Slayer picks up on Victory Harbin. Both of them are written by Christopher Paul Carey. It lets Jansen Gridley actually do something because he kind of got shortchanged in that novel a bit. He seems to be falling out of love with Victory and falls for Darva the Shadow, the new character that's introduced here. It's pretty enjoyable stuff. You know, it has a beginning, middle, and end. I appreciate the effort at putting in a romance there and a character journey. I did find it a little bit weird about how, you know, Darva was okay with letting the Gorbasis kill people and that Jansen is okay with Darva being okay with that. But, you know, stuff happens. And as I said in my non-spoiler review, I did really enjoy The Fallen. I just found it to be a well-written, enjoyable story. And I really like Mock. I love the fact that because he didn't understand Abner Perry's endless explanations about things, he just left them out of his narration. I'm like, could you please narrate the next 2 books? But seriously, I did really like Mock's character. I love the opening where he introduces himself saying he's the son of, I don't know. I mean, there was just such great wit to that. And especially after you've read so much Pellucidar in this book, it's just nice to see a little bit of, you know, not taking itself so seriously, right? And I just really identified with his feeling of isolation and wanting to find a mate. I just was really rooting for the guy. But of course, it was Marina's story. And I find her probably the most likable character in this book. I mean, she just is, a very human sort of character, very likable. And she's not a psychopath or in love with a psychopath. So that's good. So anyway, that's my thoughts at this point on this book. And again, I feel like it really picked up towards the end there, and I did enjoy the backup stories. So I do think that the next couple books in this trilogy, I will probably find a lot more to enjoy. I think the Dead Moon is a very interesting place, and I do look forward to seeing them explore it. All right, like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, see ya.